I have it on very good authority that the BYU Cougars are indeed tampering. It comes via my uncle's third cousin's ex-wife, once removed from the family tree up a creek without a paddle, though.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? I'm Jake Hatch, your host here on Locked On Cougars, resident BYU insider. Thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. As always, thank you to all of you who are everydayers with us right here on your original daily podcast focused on the BYU Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. All right. We are going to talk BYU allegations of tampering. Then we're going to talk about roster changes for the BYU basketball program, both good and potential ones. And we'll finish up today's show with some intel on Rob Wright that Baylor fans are going to want to avert their eyes and ears from. So let's get right into it. And yes, you heard me say in the open of today's show that I have it on good authority that the BYU Cougars are tampering. Breaking news. Everybody's tampering. All right. This blew up yesterday. Now, let me say at the outset here, the biggest thing with tampering in this day and age of college sports, particularly in college football and college basketball, is that tampering doesn't exist in the sense that it exists in other professional sports. Tampering in the professional sports leagues are obviously scrutinized heavily because they obviously have a collective bargaining agreement. There can be fines and suspensions and all the different types of repercussions for tampering under the parameters that the professional sports have. Right now in college sports, we have, count them, 0 restrictions to anything going on with regards to NIL, the transfer portal, etc. Utah can levy all kinds of allegations via their media partners, via whoever they want, their lay fans, about BYU's supposed tampering. Great. So be it. You can levy those all you want. But let's also acknowledge the fact that there's something that I subscribe to wholeheartedly, and I'm not the only one in the media sphere who subscribes to this. I've got good friends. We've talked about this extensively. There is a term that's been used for years with regards to nuclear technology and nuclear warfare across the globe. It's called MAD. The acronym is MAD, M-A-D. What it stands for is mutually assured destruction. You'll every so often hear some saber rattling from a coach. I can think of Jim Mora up at UConn did this once upon a time. Other coaches have said they're saying, hey, we know that players are being tampered within our program. We've got the receipts to prove it. All right, coach. Show the receipts. What happens? They clam up real fast. The receipts are never shown because, going back to my acronym MAD, mutually assured destruction. If you were to air out all of the tampering allegations, and I don't care what program it is, BYU or any one of the 130 plus FBS, 100 plus more FCS, whatever level of football you're at, if you were to air all of the dirty laundry about the allegations that you have the supposed receipts for, you would obviously be putting out there a lot of people getting them in trouble. Guess what happens in that circumstance? Those people turn right around and they will air all of your dirty laundry, and the skeletons that are in your closet get exposed. So therefore, essentially, nobody is going to actually do anything about this. Is anybody getting in trouble for tampering in this day and age of college sports? Absolutely not, because if they do, the NCAA would have to enforce that, and the NCAA would be slapped so hard with a lawsuit so quickly that an injunction would be filed, and the NCAA would have egg on their face. Yet again, they want nothing more than to have as little egg on their face than they already do. So I can acknowledge the fact that BYU via third parties, whether they be parents, agents, rogue booster, whatever you want to term it, that there are discussions going on between third parties of player representatives, whether it's players at Utah or insert any other university out there, that BYU may be talking to them saying, hey, what may it take for a guy like this, if he were to enter the transfer portal, to consider playing in Provo, Utah for the Brigham Young University football or men's basketball program? That in and of itself could be levied as tampering. As innocuous and maybe as simple of a conversation, that could be considered tampering. Yes, you could also have somebody out there saying, going to a player's parent or to the player themselves and saying, hey, what would it take for you to come and play for us? And I'm not saying this is just BYU. This is every program out there is doing this. And I can already get ready for the YouTube comment saying, Jake, well, BYU talks about holding themselves to a higher standard. Fantastic. The reputation precedes BYU. We get all this. I'm on one today, so just bear with me for a minute. I'm going to rant. I'm going to rave. Here's the deal. BYU understands what they're up against. They are a church-affiliated school. They have put out some information out there via their own PR team. Think about a couple weeks ago when the whole thing with Clark G. Gilbert saying the BYU will be competitive in NIL and tried to tamp down the fact that BYU is trying to obviously compete in NIL, but they won't be the highest bidder. Okay, you cannot tell me that BYU is not among the highest bidders, if not the highest bidder in some of these negotiations. The reports are, and they're heavily reported out of Baylor, that Rob Wright was going to make $1 million at Baylor. And the reports are, and I've got pretty good authority, the number for him is north of $2 million. That's a pretty high number. It seemed to me that that'd be a person or a program that's probably the highest bidder in that circumstance. Yes, you'll throw back at me that AJ DeBonsa, the money was relative. AJ DeBonsa considered BYU because the money was in play. We cannot go out there in Cougar Nation and say that BYU is not doing it simply, they're not having success simply because of the money. They're having success because of the money and the NIL that's come into this program. But in addition to that, everything that BYU has right now with their coaching staff, the facilities, the staff around the coaching staffs, we're talking the nutritionists, the just everything, the layers that BYU has around it, it helps. It absolutely helps. That's what set BYU apart when the money was all relative for AJ DeBonsa and his family. But for anybody out there, I'm not speaking just for BYU in this circumstance. Anybody to levy tampering allegations and then conveniently a few hours later, a certain wide receiver one, Zacharias Williams for the University of Utah, actually is entering the NCAA transfer. Well, that came out. You can't tell me the timeline there isn't just a tad bit curious. I understand that universities will use people that they can trust, sources. I've got people that feed me information from BYU, and I have to vet it all the time. I like to say this. I've done this for 15 years. I've been in sports radio for 15 years in Salt Lake City. Early on in my career, anybody inside a football program, BYU otherwise, could have told me something. I was probably going to run with it. Over the years, I've had some really, really strong mentors out there, and they know who they are, who have essentially taught me what I like to refer to as the sniff test. When I get a piece of information, and it doesn't, just bear with me for a minute here. The sniff test for me is if I get a piece of information, if it seems fishy to me, I can follow up with other sources and try and vet that information and see if it's correct. If it doesn't line up, then it is, you know what? We'll call it horse doo-doo. Other times, there is what I consider to be horse doo-doo right at the outset that I'm like, yeah, you know what? Considering the source, considering the material here, I'm out on it. And I refuse to engage with it. And that proves later on to actually be the truth. I have had to eat crow on stuff like that in the past. But more often than not, over the years of me going through this process with sources and obviously developing relationships with them, I've got a pretty good sense for what is horse doo-doo and what is actually intel that is useful, that can be moved along. Do I believe that Utah leaked some information to some of their reporters? Absolutely. But we saw that happen just a couple of weeks ago with BYU via some of their people down there at BYU TV and in-house media, Greg Wrubell and the like. Jerem Jordan, I think, did it. Didn't Spencer Linton put something out there? So you can't tell me that both sides aren't playing this game, and they're not the only ones playing this game. Literally every university nationwide are doing this very song and dance to varying levels of success. It seems desperate from Utah to be saying what they're saying about leveraging tampering allegations against BYU. Here's a simple fact of life. I had somebody connected to one of the alleged players at Utah that BYU supposedly is tampering with. I reached out to them and said, hey, question for you. What's going on? Is BYU making overtures to insert player name here? The response I got was, there are opportunities across the country for him, unquote. Okay, so there you go. That's kind of the sense of what's going on, hopefully in a nutshell for you guys. Is it perfect? No. Is BYU got some dirty hands potentially? Sure. But I don't think it's Kalani, Sitake or Kevin Young who are sitting over there in their office being like, hey, calling kids and texting kids saying, hey, you want this much money if you hit the transfer portal? That's not happening. There are third parties out there working on behalf of various universities across this country, and they're tampering with guys at BYU. BYU is obviously trying to ward that off, and we've seen already 2 high-profile defections from BYU, one of which I wholeheartedly believe was probably due to what you would call tampering. But the bigger point is this is happening everywhere, and to be trying to rub your rival's nose in it and try and hold them to a supposed higher standard, let's get over it. Let's get past it and understand that this is the era of college football that we're in and college basketball that we're in, and NIL is a big part of it, and BYU's got money, and it just grinds certain people's gears that BYU is playing by said rules and winning along with that. And it's not that BYU's winning every recruiting battle out there. I thought there was a chance. We talked about Trayshawn Hurry, wide receiver transfer from San Jose State, if you're an everydayer, not too long ago. Well, BYU apparently didn't, tamper enough because he committed to Louisville. It's just another example. BYU's not going to win them all. They never will. They never have. And that will continue to be the case. The nice part is BYU is competing very favorably on a national stage, and that apparently is making certain people very upset, and they're trying to manufacture some type of insinuation that BYU's getting by with doing something above and beyond what's going on with everybody else. Come at me. Let me know what you think. If I'm up in the night, if I'm crazy, whatever it is, I don't care. I wanted to get that off my chest. Now, in better news, BYU basketball roster talk. Pretty high-profile guy officially returns after the transfer portal closed last night for basketball. Also, could BYU finally get a guy that they've been courting for the better part of 3 years to finally show up in Provo, Utah? We'll dig into that next with college basketball and the BYU basketball program. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Monarch Money. All right, Monarch Money. Have you ever checked your bank account? And they're here for you guys because obviously we'll check that bank account every so often and say, hey, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track, and that's where Monarch Money comes in. They are your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. It's not just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending in one place so you can stop just managing your money and start building wealth. Obviously, all of us want to be smarter when it comes to our money. The best part is instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track your spending, and even plan long-term goals all in the same area. Take control of your finances today and do it with our friends over at Monarch Money. Use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, promo code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Hope you all are doing well on this Wednesday, and thank you for enduring what I just went off the diatribe I went off on. But I get fed up with certain things, and obviously had to get some thoughts off of my mind and chest there. But good news is BYU basketball is continuing to remake this roster and retool the roster in Kevin Young's image. Obviously, he had an ultra successful season a year ago, and he's got a lot of nice pieces coming in, obviously headlined by A.J. DeBonsa. He is the crown jewel. He's the number 1 overall pick. He'll be the number 1 overall pick, according to most people's projections in the 2026 NBA draft. But depending on where you look, he's either the number 1, or in the case of 24/7 Sports, the number 2 overall prospect in this recruiting cycle. He comes in, and he obviously is going to carry a whole lot of the weight of carrying BYU's fortunes with him. The nice part is BYU got some good news yesterday that Brody Kozlowski, who was a guy that a lot of people were excited for when he committed to BYU. He was a 4-star prospect, 2-time state player of the year, Mr. Basketball here in the state of Utah out of Corner Canyon High School. Had a highly publicized commitment to USC, broke that when Andy Enfield bailed for SMU, and comes home and plays for the family alma mater and plays for BYU. Now, His freshman season was beset by injury. He will get a medical hardship waiver, it appears, and he'll be a redshirt freshman next year. And there was some question of, as this portal window kind of wore on, would he actually ultimately look at his other options after not playing much last year? Well, he officially announced yesterday that I'm all in. I'm locked in with BYU basketball. And that's a great sign. It's a young man who understands the vision for what BYU has for him. I'm sure he had extensive conversations with Kevin Young and the rest of the BYU staff and was understanding of what BYU sees for him. And I think the biggest thing for a guy like Brody Kozlowski, as he watched a 10 and 11 man rotation last year play out, maybe wondered at points, hey, if I could get healthy, would I really crack this rotation? And I think the best message that could have been sent to him, and I don't know this for certain, is to be patient. Remember, BYU had some upperclassmen last year that have now exited the program. There's obviously some transfer portal defections and additions, and there will still be additions, and we'll talk about a potential couple or three coming up momentarily. But the nice part is Brody Kozlowski has got a nice ability as a 6'7" sharpshooter to, I think, thrive in this BYU system. Is he ever going to be the featured player for BYU? Probably not, but his ability to knock down three-pointers and do it with an incredibly high pace and high tempo playing at the high school level should benefit him as he posts up in the corner at times for BYU in this offense, maybe plays off the dribble a little bit. And the other thing I like about Brody is being 6'7", he can offer some rebounding for BYU as well. So I look forward to having Brody back in the fold for BYU. And in theory, should AJ DeBonsa, should Richie Saunders be leading the way for BYU, the nice part is with the magnetism of their star power, those two alone, BYU is going to find open shots. And guys like Brody Kozlowski should feast and thrive in the system. So I think it was a really, really smart play on his part to stick around at BYU when in many respects it would have been very easy to see him hit the exits and look for another opportunity. I think that patience is going to pay off, and he is going to be he's going to be well rewarded, I think, overall, given adequate time. And here, fingers crossed, he has a good run of health coming up as well. Because as I said, he was beset by injury as a freshman, and we'll get that medical waiver to get a year back. Now, BYU is obviously looking for a player to fill what I call the Dallin Hall role. It's the role that Dallin Hall took on as the backup point guard / two guard ball handler role. And BYU apparently has got a guy that they have flirted with for multiple years in a row coming to campus. Apparently visit began yesterday for Dominic Harris. Now, Dominic Harris, I'll take you back to 2023, was coming out of Gonzaga. He was a junior then, if I recall correctly, had a decent run with the Bulldogs and visited BYU and ultimately decided that LMU, Loyola Marymount, a former West Coast Conference rival of BYU and Gonzaga's, was where he wanted to go play because it offered a more of a featured role for him down there at LMU. He had a monster year playing for not the Gales. Are they? No, the Lions, Loyola Marymount. That's beside the point. Had a really, really strong season, hit the portal once again, and then essentially made the crosstown trek from Loyola Marymount in LA to UCLA. Now, this past year at UCLA, barely played, it felt like. I think it was 11 games, 12 total points on the year. The year before that, at LMU, he's a 6'3" guard, by the way. He averaged 14.3 points, shooting 44.8% from three for the LMU Lions. I don't necessarily know what to take away from this is that, hey, maybe he thrives at the G5 level or the mid-major level because that's what Gonzaga and I don't think Gonzaga is a top-tier program. That's probably a bad comparison. But LMU, a mid-major program, he thrived there. Then he goes across town to UCLA and barely plays and barely scores. Where's the truth here? What is BYU trying to get out of Dominic Harris? If this finally, the third time's the charm, the third visit, because he flirted with BYU last year, and they were a finalist alongside UCLA. This is the third offseason that he's been in the conversation for BYU. I feel like I'm doing like Groundhog Day talking about him here on this podcast. But I think the bigger point is BYU's betting on Dominic Harris being the Dominic Harris they saw at LMU and also at Gonzaga versus what they saw at UCLA. Maybe Mick Cronin's system was just an awful fit for him, even though he was sold on it in the transfer portal cycle. Great. That happens. I can tell you time and time again, a lot of guys look for the grass is greener and they're sold a false bill of goods by coaches and they finally get to campus and they're like, this isn't anything like I expected. It happens. But I think a guy like Dominic Harris BYU has seen him play up close and personal for multiple years in a row, and they are betting on getting more of the LMU version of Dominic Harris if he picks BYU as a 60-year senior to come in and be that backup guard behind a guy like Robert Wright III. I think this is a tailor-made fit for a guy like Dominic Harris. He doesn't have to come in and be the guy, because we just talked about the fact that you have guys like an AJ DeBonza, you have Richie Saunders, Robert Wright III is absolutely got star power of his own. A guy like Dominic Harris could thrive in that off guard and off ball role where he is much like a Brody Kozlowski, spotting up in the corner and finding himself wide open with the defense drawing in to guys driving and kicking. It's a great fit. And I hope that Dominic Harris finally pulls the trigger and decides the BYU, the third time is the charm for him to come and be a Cougar, because I think he's an upperclassman. He'd bring some, obviously some upperclassman mojo, leadership, just veteran presence to the BYU roster that they do have some of that, but they lost some last year. I think this would be a tailor-made fit for BYU, and we'll see how it all goes down. But the biggest thing for BYU, and I think Kevin Young's understanding this, is yes, he's always going to bring in top-tier talent as much as he possibly can, but he also wants to intersperse it with guys who are very capable in playing role player positions, but more importantly, getting elder statesman is probably the wrong term, but veteran presences on his roster alongside the young starlets he'll have playing for the BYU basketball program. It's a very interesting mix. It's very tricky to get it right, but Kevin Young, I think year one has proven that he deserves the benefit of the doubt. And we'll see what happens here with Dominic Harris, because it sure looks like it could be a really nice fit. Now, two other guys that BYU is apparently talking to, at least, according to reports. Auburn Anytime, no idea the veracity of this count, is saying that Auburn wing Chad Baker Mazzara has seen interest from BYU among many others as a 6'7" wing player. He averaged 12.3 points per game this past year for the Auburn Tigers. Obviously made a run to the Final Four with Auburn, so would it be a veteran presence as well? He is a junior, if I recall correctly. So that's obviously something to pay attention to there. And then the other player to pay attention to, for those of you who are going to crow at me, Jake, they're not recruiting big men. Well, they have apparently reached out to Florida Atlantic big man Baba Miller. He's a 6'11" big man who averaged 11.3 points per game, 7 rebounds, and 2.7 assists for the Owls this past year. So that's one to pay attention to. You can't teach a versatile big man like that. The height he has and the stats indicate he's got something to him as well. So roster updates, retention, third time's the charm, flirtation. Who knows what happens with BYU basketball, but my overall message to you, trust Kevin Young. He's doing a really, really incredible job. And I think that what he has proven so far is he is firmly in control, and he understands what it takes to build a roster, and trust that he'll get the mix right. And we'll see what the results are, obviously, coming up this next season. All right. Final stanza of today's show coming up next. And it's something that Baylor fans are not going to want to hear. Baylor obviously is upset that Robert Wright III is playing for BYU, but according to one expert, it is an absolutely perfect fit for BYU basketball. Why? Stay tuned. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Hope you all are doing great out there. If you've not done so already, join the Locked On Cougars Insider Group and get the inside scoop on all things BYU sports coming to your phone in the form of a text message. The best part is you get a 14-day free trial to see if it's the right option for you, and it's just $5 a month after that to be a part of the Insider Group. What do you got to lose? Join us today. Find out if it's right for you. Over the 2 weeks, you get free before you're charged a single penny. Link is in the show notes below, whether you're watching this on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast, and look forward to seeing you out there in the Locked On Cougars Insider Group. All right, before we go on today's show, let's talk about an interesting piece from CBS Sports, and this comes from the author, I had this earlier, Isaac Trotter, who covers college basketball for CBS Sports. He wrote a piece about the best fits from the college basketball transfer portal, and it includes how BYU fixed a major flaw. Now, the number 3 question, he says, why Rob Wright is BYU's problem-solving PG1? He says this, inside the fit, BYU needed a paint-touch guard, and boy, did it cash the chips in for one of the best in the country. Nearly half of Rob Wright's thirds last year came at the rim. The shifty, twitchy point guard could shine in this NBA-style offense. He has mastered the art of playing alongside a superstar, so sliding into that secondary role to the high-stepping AJ DeBonsa, and I'll also insert here, because he didn't put it in here, Richie Saunders, should be smooth. He adds this: Wright won't have to create a good look for BYU in every possession, but when it's time for Wright to take over the pick-and-roll conductor, BYU's orchestra will have every instrument he needs to be successful. BYU's catch-and-shoot assassins should be looming in the corner, and Dawson Baker, Richie Saunders here, Mihailo Boskovic. We talked a little bit earlier. I think a guy like Brody Kozlowski is going to thrive in this role as well. That would obviously be looking forward to those open opportunities. Also adds this: it has multiple lob threats too, right? We'll just have to toss in the general vicinity of the backboard, and one of Keba Keita or Xavion Staten will be ready to flush it down. DeBonsa will be looming somewhere as well, just itching to attack the long closeouts Wright will generate. This has a chance to be an extremely profitable union because BYU can cover up some of Wright's weaknesses and maximize his strengths, unquote. Sorry, Baylor fans. That seems pretty tailor-made for what BYU is looking for. And I agree with what Mr. Trotter is saying here. BYU did need a guard who could be the conductor and could slow things down, but also at times be able to take it over. And yes, we saw Jaeger Demon do that. But Jaeger Demon's dad went on, I don't remember what it was, and essentially said that Jaeger wasn't really able to develop his game because BYU is in a winning situation. And I think that comes off as critical of Kevin Young and BYU. I don't think it was intended as such. It was a simple statement of fact. Jaeger Demon's game in the NBA is going to be completely different than it was asked to do in Kevin Young's system at BYU. And you may say, well, hold on. It's an NBA-style offense, Jake. Jaeger Demon needs a lot of development. Obviously, he needs to hone his shot. He's one of the best passers in the world for his age. That's no doubt about it. But he will be a very different player, but I think ultimately a more successful player in the NBA than he was in college because his style of game is more fit for the professional model. Robert Wright III, he's by basketball standards, he's diminutive. And I use that term and people get upset, but he's 6'1". He's not 6'9" like Jaeger Demon. But what Robert Wright III has in spades is a fearlessness. I call it the fight that he's got in him. You know, that whole adage, the size of the dog in the fight is not as important as the size of the fight in the dog. I think I butchered that, but regardless, you get what I'm talking about. He's got that in spades. He is unafraid of going to the rim, despite being relatively pint-sized as compared to some of the 7-footers there that are lurking at the rim, trying to swat the ball, get it out of his hands, and create a break the other way. The nice part is his ability to get to the rim will draw the defense, and all he's got to do, kick it out. Get it out to the guys in the wings. Kevin Young's offense is tailor-made for what Robert Wright III, as Mr. Trotter writes here, is very capable of doing. I don't mean this to sound bad, but Robert Wright III is going to be a far, far better college basketball player than Jaeger Demon will or was or would ever be for BYU. Once again, that may sound critical, but I'm telling you, Robert Wright III, his game is more fit for the college model than Jaeger Demon's was. I'm not saying that Robert Wright III is not going to have potential to play at the NBA level. In fact, I think playing in an NBA-esque system like this will highlight more to NBA scouts of how he overcomes the fact that they will obviously be marking down that he is just, in their minds, maybe too small to play at the NBA level. Smaller guards are having a tougher and tougher time thriving in the NBA. It's not impossible. We are seeing Jalen Brunson. We're seeing Kyrie Irving. We are seeing some really, really effective guards. Mike Conley has lasted so long despite being a very short and slender guy. Robert Wright III's got a pattern in his game after these guys, and having guys alongside him who can highlight his skills and, as Trotter says, maybe mask some of his deficiencies, particularly, I think, on the defensive end because he's not the biggest guy out there. This is it's an ideal fit for BYU to have Robert Wright in the system. Kevin Young has got to be absolutely ecstatic to have him playing for the BYU Cougars. Yes, it may have cost him somewhere between $2 and $3 million. But we're hearing from these boosters that BYU, the quote, won't be outbid. BYU is in the mix, and they are making a major impression. But it's not just the money. Let me reiterate: the money is not it's obviously a deciding factor, I think, because let's be honest, any of us would go for that amount of money. I'm talking as a podcaster here. You offered me $2 million to go podcast for another company. Yeah, I'd probably take you up on it. Reality is I'm never going to get that type of money podcasting. But the bigger point remains is that Robert Wright III appears to be just an absolutely ideal fit in this BYU system. Kevin Young is going to be drawing up all kinds of new ways to attack defenses. And Robert Wright III, he is unbothered by the more physical nature that college basketball allows teams to play with. That was one of the things that Jaeger Demon struggled with, was the fact that guys could put hands on him. They will not be able to do that in the NBA. That is why I think Jaeger Demon is going to thrive at the professional level, whereas a guy like Robert Wright III, what he has is an ability to overcome the physical and the just downright ugly style of basketball at times that college basketball can throw at you. So I look forward to seeing how Robert Wright does in the system, but I think Baylor fans, cry your eyes out. But Robert Wright III is stepping into an absolutely electric and just tailor-made fit for his skill set. And I, for one, I cannot wait to see it all unfold with the BYU basketball program this fall. I never, trust me, you guys know I'm a college basketball guy who are everydayers out there. I never want to wish away a football season or the summer, quite frankly. But I'm telling you, I am as ecstatic and eager to get to the next BYU basketball season to see what this team looks like under Kevin Young's direction. Really, I'm telling you, the hype that I have, the hype I feel for this team, I cannot wait to see it go out there. And the best part is, roster isn't even fully constructed. What else can Kevin Young bring in? Sure feels like he's got time and resources out there to bring in some really, really nice pieces to hopefully bolster this BYU basketball team and help them take yet another step. They made the Sweet 16 this past year, Elite 8, Final Four. That's all out there on the horizon for BYU. Just how far can they go? It feels like the sky is the limit for BYU basketball, and that should be exciting to you as a Cougar fan. All right, that'll do it. I think I got everything out there that I wanted to. But coming up later on this week, we are going to do a crossover edition with JT Wistersill from Locked On Utes. Wonder what we could be talking about there. Should be a lot of fun. Well, obviously, the Big 12 squad is coming up tomorrow as well. But as always, thank you for all of your guys' support here on the podcast. It absolutely means the world to me. Continue to subscribe, rate, review, share with your family and friends, and make sure you join us literally every single day, as we like to call you guys, our everydayers, right here on the Locked On Cougars podcast.